This lesson is for addiction counseling students. This is a part of Supervision University's Job and Internship Search Strategies course. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about how to find a practicum site or supervision site in addiction counseling. So just as a reminder, addiction counseling licensing is handled by the state, and it really helps you get a job in various states. Often they're aligned with national standards, NADAC or IC&RC. And they're going to require some combination of education hours. Supervision courses count as those. An exam. Supervision courses are aligned to help you pass. Some states will require supervised practicum hours, and then other states just have work experience hours. Now, the supervised practicum hours have very specific requirements in a lot of those states. So the work experience is often very flexible. The supervised practicum hours, usually there's two parts that make them a lot more difficult. One is, in most states, your supervisor has to be licensed to be a licensed supervisor, one. And two, it usually has to be tied to some sort of academic institution. And Supervision, we have a practicum course where you can do that. So in Missouri, for the CDAC licensing as an example, they require 300 practicum hours, and that's how that ties in. Now, with your state, you're going to need to research this yourself to figure out what are the requirements. Various states have different requirements. So what are the requirements for someone to be a clinical supervisor? Now, for a lot of you, you're just going to contact them and say, do you have anyone who can do supervision? And just ask them. But for some organizations, you may need to do some research just so you understand the context. All states are going to require clinical supervisors to either be licensed counselors or licensed addiction counselors. So it's kind of like, just like a doctor who they might have a resident, the person supervising the resident, after they go through med school, they have to do a residency to become a doctor. The person supervising has to be a doctor. It's the same thing in counseling. And the four different categories, you'd have a licensed addiction counselor, someone who's a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, and in many states, a licensed marriage and family therapist can also do it. Now, in addition to just being licensed as a counselor in one of those capacities, a lot of states will also require that they be certified or licensed as a clinical supervision. Some examples of this, many of the states will honor national clinical supervisor certification. So IC&RC, they have a clinical supervisor examination. A lot of states will just say, the clinical supervisor has to pass that examination and, turn in some paperwork. And same thing with NADAC. There's a national clinical supervisor endorsement. So ultimately, you really don't need to know all the details of this, but you do need to be sure that, and the reason why we're explaining this to you is we don't want you to go and think that you're getting adequate supervision, and then you turn in your paperwork to the state and they say your supervisor wasn't adequately licensed. So there's really three categories of students. So one is you are seeking licensure and you're currently staff in a nonprofit or ministry that can provide counseling supervision. In that case, really you don't need this course. Because you probably already have someone who can provide your counseling supervision. Now, this course really is for people in the other two categories. So you're seeking licensure, you're currently staff or in volunteer leadership in a nonprofit or ministry, but without qualified supervisors. So some states may allow for remote supervision. So that's where, so say you're at a ministry like a rescue mission or Salvation Army, and you have people who are very experienced in ministry and counseling, but they're not licensed. And they can provide supervision, but it won't have the right requirements. Supervision faculty may be able to provide remote supervision through our practicum course. So you need to do research in your state, and you should work in this course to see if you can get remote supervision. And then the third group is you're seeking licensure and you're not currently staff or volunteer leadership in a nonprofit or ministry that can provide counseling supervision. so ultimately, um, if you don't develop the relationships, you're going to need to develop those relationships to get the practical experience, or else it's going to be more difficult for you to get jobs. So that's the summary here. You're going to have to do some research on this, work with your faculty member, and make sure that if you're looking for supervision, that you're getting the right people to do the supervision. Now, one last thing I would say, the expectation is in the field is for practicum supervision, usually you're doing that on a volunteer basis. Not in every state, and it kind of depends. But going back to this list here of the hours, in most in most states, the expectation for the experience hours, that's usually while you're staff someplace, but often the practicum hours are usually before your staff. So if you're looking only to get a practicum where you're going to get paid, depending on where you are, it may be completely impossible, because what you might encounter is you might encounter treatment centers that they have 20 students coming to them all wanting to volunteer to get a practicum, and they have to pick 3. So if you go to that site and you say, well, I'm wanting you to pay me, it's just not going to happen. And that's just a part of how you have to get licensed. So you can figure out what the requirements are in your state, and again, ask your faculty member if you have questions. Thanks a lot.